Okay, so good morning, guys. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, Sumit, we can see.
Okay, perfect. So welcome to week 4 of ABAP on HANA session. So we'll first briefly start with today's agenda, and then we can quickly deep dive into the topics that we are actually going to learn in this session. So first we'll have a quick recap, and as we have already started on SAP oData, and this is on the second week for oData, we'll after the quick recap we'll learn something new, which is called association, navigation, and cardinality, which is in oData's term pretty much important, because each time it won't be the case that we'll be doing all the operation on a single entity. We might require to let's say retrieve the data from multiple entity, do some sort of update or a post operation on multiple entities at a time, like on a single save call or on a single update call or something. So that's where this particular cardinality terms with the help of association and navigation would be very handy. Then we'll go through an example of like how the header and line item data would be related to each other, and how we can actually use the association and navigation part in picture. Then there is something called get expanded entity and create deep entity that we would be actually looking into, and we'll find how and when we can use it, and in what scenario it would be beneficial. Then we would be discussing the generic handler for filtering, paging, and sorting, because till now we have discussed that whenever we want to do any sort of filtering and paging or sorting, we have to retrieve its individual parameters from the method and then use it further as per our requirement, and whatever input user is passing, we have to handle it individually. Let's say if the user is saying I need a filter for, let's say, company code, let's say I handle it and move it to, let's say, live production system. Tomorrow if the user is coming back and saying hey, along with company code, can you give me a filter on purchasing order document type also. So if the data is already there but filter is not available because we haven't handled it in the backend, then we have to again do the code changes and send it. But if we have a generic handler in place, then we can do that particular stuff dynamically. So let's first quickly jump into the system and have a quick recap on what we did till last week. Okay. So yeah. So in last week, our what we learned was CRUD queue operation. As we know, oData is nothing but a ODBC for web. So what is ODBC? It's like a open database connectivity. In open database connectivity, we can do all sort of operations like insert, update, delete, query, whatever operation we can perform on a particular database. Same way, why oData is called ODBC for web? Because the same operation we are actually performing on the web with the help of HTTP, because HTTP also support its multiple functionality using put, post, patch, delete, insert, and all those particular statements. So that particular operation are nothing but the CRUD queue operation. So as we already seen into the system, whenever we want to do any sort of query operation, we know we can get either 0 record or multiple records also. So we can't pass a primary key, because primary key would be individually identifying a record. So we would be needing a filter, and for that we would be implementing a method call which is ending with a get entity set for a particular entity. If you want to do a read operation, let's say if I want to read information for a particular record, then we would of course need a primary key, because we are sure that we want only one record. So for a record to get uniquely identified, all we will need is a primary key. So the get entity method will get redefined, and the primary key would be the main input. So whenever a record is is to be created, if whenever we are planning to like do a post operation using a oData, the create entity method should get triggered. But whenever we are creating a new record, the primary key would actually get generated. We are not knowing. Okay, let me share it again. Maybe you just joined, that's why you might not be able to. But Okay. So yeah, is it visible? Are you able to see the screen now? Okay, perfect. Okay. So what we are discussing is was on the CRUD queue part. So the CRUD queue part, in the query we would of course need a filter and not the primary key, because we would be fetching multiple data. In read operation we'll need a primary key. Whereas if we discuss on the create part, create means, let's assume a scenario, we want to create a purchase order. So whenever we are creating a purchase order, we are knowing individual detail like what is the company code, to what particular purchasing document type we are actually planning to create a purchase order, and all those things. What we won't be knowing is the purchasing order identity, that is its primary key, the purchase order number. So that particular primary key we won't be able to pass in the input while doing the create operation. So whenever you are doing any sort of create operation, key won't be required, but and key should not be passed. It won't be required, but it's strictly documented that like you can't pass a key while doing any kind of post operation. All you need to do is you need to pass all the body parameters. That is something what we call a payload. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. And whenever we want to delete any particular line, all we need is a primary key, because we have to uniquely identify that particular record. And whenever we want to update a record, we have to strictly say which particular record we want to update. So we'll need a primary key. So this is all about the CRUD queue operation. Then we have seen a particular record in live, like let's say if there is any particular report which we want to create. In a particular report, let's say if you want multiple filters, along with that we need a create button using which we can create an individual line item for, let's say, delivery. So this combination would behave as a key. Whenever we do change or delete, that particular operation will get performed. And for that, all we need was we need particular first the data source. Then whenever a user is inputting, we need the data to get retrieved. That's why we use the read operation using a primary key. That's what something the URI should look alike. Then after a read operation has been performed, UI of the developer, we bind everything over here. After user's input, on the save call, what we will be getting is a post call. So on the post call, as we can see, we are not passing any sort of key over here, but all the data which has been filled in the form will get passed in the actual backend call. So the purchase order number should get retrieved. So next time whenever someone is coming here and changing it, all we would be getting is a primary key, like that is a combination of DID and EBLN, and we would be able to see all the data that has been saved visible over here. And upon click of save, all we would be getting is a update call with the same header call, like same header URI, which would be containing an entity set name as well as the primary key. And on the delete operation, all we would be getting is a particular entity with a primary key for the delete operation to actually identify the record which particular line we want to delete. If we see everything in the system, and we would if we see everything in the system, then of course what we are currently having is, here we implemented all the CRUD queue operation. During the create operation, we retrieve all the payload. To retrieve the payload, what all we need is we need a read entry data, and this is the common method for all. The data provider would be the one which we would be using. And using the data provider, we can get the data, and then of course it's a simple ABAP. We can get the data, pass, get the maximum ID derived, and generate the next available ID and pass it to the database. Okay. Same way it is for the get entity. We can read the key parameter from the IT key tab. All have our weapons for us available would be the input parameters from this method. So that is something which we should be knowing which parameter to use when and where. Okay. And ultimately the update and delete entity would also be retrieving the data, but as we know, delete entity would be retrieving the key. So that particular key parameter would be getting from this particular IT key tab, and we would be using it as and when we require it. So that is all about the something which we learned in the last session, the CRUD part and how we should be using the particular entity. Okay. Next thing, let's talk about okay. So next thing which we would be discussing in this particular lecture would be something called association, navigation, and cardinality. So let's first learn something on the theoretical part, how actually association, navigation, and cardinality are working.
Sumit, Sumit.
Yeah, please.
I think last class
Yes,
we
Rakesh.
left something. In a last class we left few topics. I think so. In the last class.
Yeah, that's something what we call association, navigation, and cardinality, and expand. Okay, yeah, that's the thing. So that's what we like. We are not going to left anywhere anything. So what we left in the last week, we would be covering today. Example involving entity navigations. That is the first topic of today's topic, and expand URI is something that we would be using while you actually using navigation in a particular calls in any sort of HTTP call. To use a navigation, we will need expand. So that's what we will be covering in today's lecture. Okay. So yes, the agenda which we were having for the last week's lecture, we would be covering it today, because that's what I mentioned in earlier lecture also. This was a part of this lecture only, but as why did I mention is if we are like pretty fast and cover this topic earlier, then we would have some time left, then we would be covering this particular topic. Okay. Okay, so let's quickly jump into the system and let's see if association, navigation, and cardinality is something what we are going to learn. Okay. Okay. Association, navigation, and cardinality. Okay. So first we'll go with the cardinality. Okay, what is cardinality? Let's say if I have a particular header data, let's say, or let's say PO header data. Okay, and let's say line item data. Let's say PO line item. Okay, so let's say if you want to build a particular relationship between the header and the line item information, first we should be knowing for how many number of header records can we link multiple or let's say number of line item record. Let's say if we say header and line item are linked, how? Because header line item, let's say PO header is having something called let's say EBL, and this particular record is something is having something called EBL LP. Okay, so this particular line item record, if the particular PO is having one header data because it's having one entry in EKKO, it can have either no line item or it can have multiple line items also. So this is something what we call a cardinality. So cardinality is nothing but relationship between primary entity and the its dependent entity, and how actually they are gonna link with each other is something what we call the cardinality. So let's say if I have this is a example of let's say PO header and PO line item data, but in real scenarios there can be a scenario where there can be for let's say 0 to 1 header record, there can be multiple line items also. So multiple line items can vary from let's say for 0 to 1 header records, there can be only 0 to 1 line items, or there can be fixed one line item only. It's not line item, it means how the primary entity is linked with the dependent entity. If I consider PO header as a primary entity, and if I consider the company code data as a dependent entity, then particular company code dependent entity would be nothing but a data which is coming for us from a T001 table. So for this, of course, the dependent entity company code would always be having one record, because a AKKO purchase order can have only one company code at a time. Then for a one company code, there can only be one line item. That is what we call the child item relationship, and that is something what we call the cardinality. So if we have let's say parent and a child, not a parent and a child, if I say primary and dependent, Then it can have for one record there can be 0 to 1, or let's say there can be, let's say, 0 to n records also, as what we have in PO line item, or it can have, let's say, minimum number of one record, but it can vary from it can go till n number of records. Same relationship can go with primary also. Primary can have, let's say, fixed one record all the time, and for that, let's say, we can have multiple either 0 to n or 1 to n number of dependent child item or dependent entity number of lines or number of rows. So that is something what we call cardinality, and for both the primary as well as the dependent entity, the possible cardinality or possible number of records we can specify using either of this particular parameter, either of these particular possible values. Those possible values can be 0 to 1, or it can be strictly be forced to be 1, or let's say it can be vary from 0 to n or 1 to n. We'll be seeing everything in picture in the system, then it would be more clear for you. Then let's say if I have a particular PO header data and a PO line item data, then the PO header data and the PO line item data, if both are interlinked, then if I, let's say, on a particular list report over here, over here I am having an information of, let's say, particular PO information which I'm displaying over here. What if I also have a particular table over here in a same this is a list report which we are, let's say, showing. This is that particular list reports object page, and on that particular object page what we are planning to show is let's say a particular line item data. Let's say just assume it like a normal purchase order screen. Like if you have a particular purchase order and if you want to show all the line items data, how we would be doing it is like, first in the PO entry set we would be having all the information related PO header information. Then we would be again creating another entity for, let's say, PO line item. Then again we would be triggering a get call, but that get call, as it can have multiple line items, we won't be passing EBLN and EBLP, but all we would be passing it as a let's say I can pass it as a PO line item set, PO line set, and I can pass question mark dollar filter equal to EBLN equal to, let's say, the value of EBLN, let's say 45. Okay, so after passing this particular record, I can get all the line item information. But if you see from a servers, or let's say the work process perspective, first we are triggering a get call for one information, then we are again triggering get call for another information, and that is also in a scenario where these two particular information which we are actually trying to retrieve are linked. So if they are linked, if they are carrying any sort of relation, then we can club this particular two backend calls into a single one. In a single backend call, we can retrieve data for both the particular entities, and that is where the association comes into picture. So association is nothing but relationship between multiple entities. So this multiple entities relation is something what we call association. And association is nothing but something you can call a particular component of EDM, component of entity data model. This particular component of entity data model, if we want to use in a particular get call, or let's say post call, or any kind of HTTP call you are actually going to use, we have to define a property and use it. So that particular property is something what we call a particular navigation. So in a layman's language, all we can say is association is nothing but a relationship between multiple entities. Same way navigation is also relationship between multiple entities, but association is ultimately, you can say, a kind of configuration, because it just configure a relationship between multiple entities and define, hey, what is the cardinality for this particular primary and dependent entity? Can there be one record for line at PO header, because there will always be one header, and the number of line items can vary from 0 to n. So this is something that we would be defining whenever defining an particular association. And to technically use it, the technical component that we would be using is the navigation part. So association is kind of a configuration thing, and that particular configuration thing can be ultimately be used as a property of a primary entity, and that is something what we call navigation. And that navigation we would be using while doing any sort of particular get call over here. And that is where something what we left in yesterday's lecture would come into picture. Let's say if I having only PO entry header data, and if I also want to derive something called the line item information, all I would be using is question mark dollar expand equal to, I would be passing the name of this particular navigation. So this association configuration would be having, let's say, name as a PO data association, I can say. And that PO data association would be technically configured as a navigation, let's say PO data nav. This PO data nav would be something which is ultimately our food, and we would be using it over here. Okay, so this is how we would be using it. Okay, fine. So let's see everything into the system, and then it would be more clear for us. Okay, so we go into the system directly. Okay, let's first build the information that we are actually planning to retrieve. So in this particular gateway project, let's say we have PO entry data that we are actually entering over here, and over here, let's say we also build a particular line item entity. So as for this particular information, we already have built a particular table to store the data for our custom report. Let's also build a table for a particular line item information. Let's retrieve all the information from the relevant EKPO table from where actually we are referring it, to make it a bit faster and save the time. Let's say this is all the information that we are planning to use. Let's make it a transactional table with minimum data capacity. And we can directly activate it. Okay, so over here, let's say we already have an entity which we are actually currently using to show the header information. Let's again create an entity which we would be showing, which we would be creating to retrieve the line item information and just displaying it. Okay, so we can directly go into first change mode. If you are, if you can see maybe particular glass kind of thing, then it would be a particular. We would be in a display mode. Okay, so PO line item. We won't be needing a particular mandate thing over here, so we'll be removing it. and here EBLN and EBLP would be something that would behave as a primary key. So let's say we already created a particular property. In this particular property, just to remind you all again, we can have a multiple null value in a particular AE date, that is a 00 value, and that could behave as a invalid and we can run into any issues. That's why I'm like marking it as a nullable. So okay, so once we have PO line item information over here, okay, so now as we have already runtime object generated, let's just go into the particular implementation class and just implement a method using which the EDM decimal is something whenever if we see over here, we can have multiple numeric informations also, right? So let's say if I have a particular data, let's say particular quantity value. Okay, in a quantity we can have a particular value which can go from particular decimal. Let's say if I'll show you something in picture over here only. Let's just go into the system. Let's just take this particular value. As it's a quantity field, it's mandatory to specify its UM. That's why I'm specifying it. So it depends like what sort of information actually we are planning to use, and based on that we can use any of the EDM types already available. Maybe we would be learning it as and when we are actually running into a particular scenario. So yeah, Shweta, to answer your query, there is something when we can use the EDM decimal. EDM decimal is nothing but a decimal value which can have a precision and a scale. So it can have a length of 30 and we can have, let's say, up to 3 decimal places value can be available, and that's how we can use the EDM decimal. Okay, clear? I'll keep it in this particular example also so we can see it in a picture, and after regenerating all the information, okay, so once the information has been generated, let's just quickly jump into the system and redefine information, or let's say entities, handler methods to retrieve all the information. Let's say we already have this method implemented. We know to retrieve PO entry set information, multiple values based on filter, we have implemented get entity set information, right? Same way, let's redefine a method. In this particular method, redefinition, we have the method redefine. Inherited method are the ones which are actually inherited. So we can redefine the get entity set information because for a particular PO line item, we can have multiple informations. All we can check is key. Let's say if we have particular in the input data, we can have multiple parameters saying, let's say we can have a filter options as well as we can have a key option. So if we are directly, we'll see in the system also, whenever we are directly querying a particular record, we have to use $filter option. But whenever we are actually using a expand, it would be coming via a key. So that's what we would be seeing. So let's say for now, let's say if we want to query a particular EKPO table line item data. Okay, where let's say if we are getting all the if we are getting EBLN value, and that particular EBLN value can be anything. Let's say if we are having only particular EBLN and we want to retrieve a particular data, then we would be getting that information, and let's say EBLN would be the variable that I would be declaring over here. Okay, so this particular EBLN we would be using as an input over here. So now we have to retrieve the value for EBLN. Now, as I already discussed, EBLN value, if I am using, it depends on what URI actually is getting used while triggering a data. If $filter is being used, then we would be getting the information on a particular IT filter select option. But if we are going via navigation, then this particular key parameter would be passed over here. So first of all, as we already don't have any kind of navigations defined, let's just read the filter options. Okay, so we can look at let's say IT filter select option into data ls filter. The property which we would be using is the EBLN. Okay. We don't need information, so we can remove it. And the LVEBLN for us would be, we would be reading the value from ls filter dash select option, and the first line item we would be getting over here, and from that particular first line item all we need is a value, sign option low and high, so we need a low parameter, and let's keep it as optional. So if we are not getting any information, then it's perfectly fine, but to ensure that we are doing the right sort of processing, all we have to do is LVEBLN. If it is not initial, then only perform this operation, else don't return me any data. As we have multiple fields in EKPO, and the number of fields in the entity set that we define is limited, so either we can specify the list of fields, or for time being we can use into corresponding fields of. Okay. So now let's go into the QT part. Let's see how the particular line item data would be retrieved. So we have ensured that if we are getting a particular value for EBLN, then only we will return the data. So let's first get a valid value for EBLN from the database for our UT's perspective. Okay, so let's say for this 505 we have a data. So let's be using it. Line item set, and over here we would be getting question mark $filter equal to, for us it would be EBLN equal to, we would be passing this information, and as we can see we are getting multiple lines of information. let's check one more thing for the same line item. Let's just park it somewhere so I can like control A, control C, and I can use it somewhere. Let's say if I am storing the information over here for time being, let's say what information we would be getting if we are getting the header information over here. Okay, so if we are getting the information for a particular header, we are getting one item. But what if on a particular screen, whenever a particular user is coming for the first time, like by clicking on create, and he want to his requirement is to display all the information from PO header set as well as the line item data should also get displayed. What he will be doing? Like he would be clicking on create button, passing the PO, but ultimately if you see number of backend calls that are getting triggered are 2. So our ultimate target would be to reduce number of calls as minimal as possible to make our application behave faster and behave properly. So what we can do is we can define a relationship between multiple let's say entities, and we can use it. So over here I can retrieve PO entry set information, header information by one call, PO item information by another call, but I can retrieve the information in a single go. So what we can do over here is we can directly go back over here. Okay, we can directly go back over here and say let's just define an information for association. So there is an association. Association, as we already discussed, is the relationship between two entities. So let's just define that particular relationship. If we click on create, what we are being asked for is a association name. So we can say PO data association. That particular PO data association, what this is a principal entity and this is a dependent entity that we just talked about earlier. So this is a principal entity. In a principal entity, we can specify, let's say PO entry data would be my principal entity, and for its, let's say in header data there will always be a header record, then only a line item record can exist in a particular purchase order. It's case to case basic. You can select whatever is applicable for your scenario. So let's say if I have a cardinality of 1, so I can have minimum one header record, and for that one record I can have a particular line item record, and I can have multiple line item. I can have a 0 line items also. There can be a purchase order without a particular line item. So it can vary from 0 to n. So I am just selecting 0 to n. So there is a particular configuration portion which I was discussing, and from here only you can define a particular navigation portion. And over here, let's just give the name to this navigation as PO data nav. So this would behave as a navigation. So if I click on next, I would be asked for something called referential constraint. So this particular referential constraint, is something that we would be needing while defining any sort of particular navigation. Now the base rule for referential constraint is whenever you are using referential constraint or let's say a navigation or association definition, for all the components of a principal entity or for all the key component of a principal entity, a dependent entity and dependent property should be defined. Now as we are knowing, for PO line item, yeah, we are having a particular relevant information, like we can link this particular EBLN to EBLN. But for DID, are we having any sort of information over here that like this DID is linked to this particular EBLN line item? Or is like say, let's talk it another way. Let's say for a particular PO, as we already know, EBLN1, we can have multiple DIDs. Then have we specified any sort of identity in a line item entity to ensure that we are getting all the data for that particular DID only? No, right? So we have to define a particular dependent property for all the key parameters of a principal entity, the PO entry entity. So what we can do is we can directly check and go over here in a particular. Set E0, or you can say YE0, T01. Over here we have, let's say DID already defined. The same we have to define for a particular line item, and we have to define it as a primary key, because we can have multiple line items information stored. We can have for a particular DID, we can have a EBLN, or let's say purchase orders information, but the same purchase order can exist in multiple particular delivery receipt that we are actually creating. That's why I've defined it as a primary key. Okay. So let's just go and change this particular sample. So we want DID also in addition, and we can mark it as a primary key. It's is key, yes. So once we have the key stuff defined for that particular entity, okay, all we are left to do is perform as creation of association. That is the activity we are left with. So I can define a particular entity, its cardinality. Let's say I can have only one. Header information, line item information can vary from 0 to n, and over here I would be defining a navigation. Okay. And over here, from a dependent entity, the PO line items entity EBLN property EBLN is linked to headers EBLN, and its information DID is linked to here. Okay. So that particular association would create a, like entity creates entity sets, same way association will create an association sets that we won't be using anyway, but that is kind of configuration that system does. And cardinality has some sort of single key value parameters also defined. So that key value is nothing but like whenever we say key 0 to 1, the short description, it is defined as a 0, then 1 would be 1, m would be 0 to n, and n would be 1 to n. That's what the short term, or let's say terminology that has been used in oData. Okay. So if we see in entity, what we define is as a in association, we already define an association over here, and this particular association has a referential constraint defined like this. In referential constraint, whenever like if you see the principal entity that we define it as a PO entry, so if you go in PO entry over here and check, there is something called navigation property. In line item also navigation property folder is there, but navigation property won't be designed because navigation is always linked to a principal entity that has been behaving. So if you see the PO data nav, there is a kind of technical setting that is already been done by the system. The PO data nav is the name that we would be using, and these are also relationship is nothing but your association name. That is a relationship, and we would be using this particular property while doing any sort of data related operation. So we can directly regenerate it. Okay. So once we have the navigation property defined, all we have to do is we have to ensure that whatever information we are actually trying to retrieve is retrieved correctly. So let's just go into the system and put a breakpoint to understand it more clearly. So in PO entry set, let's say if our ultimate goal was whenever retrieving an information, rather than using two different call, like let's say for PO header and line item, we would be using this $expand. So expand is nothing but it's expanding the information from header till line item and retrieving all the information in a single go. So if you see, both the calls will happen in a single execution cycle. What information will get triggered? What kind of calls will get triggered? Let's say PO entry information, we are passing the key value over here. But here expand is here in the expand, this expand is actually getting the information from the referential constraint that we are actually defining. So the get entity, this particular get entity will get triggered for the PO entity set or the PO entry set, but for the PO line item, get entity set would get triggered, because we can have multiple line items. And if you see referential constraint also, let's just go to referential constraint for a clear picture. Here in referential constraint also, if you see, we have defined DID and EBLN as a relevant parameter, but this PO line item is having one more key. Or let's say, if we talk about in a terminology saying, let's say if I have a table is having three combination of key, which is kind of 3 parameter, and if I pass only 2 parameters, will I get only a single record? No, I would be getting multiple records, right? So if I will be getting multiple records, then which method will get triggered? Get entity set, because get entity set is would be able to return multiple lines of record, whereas the get entity would be able to return only single line of record. So let's put a breakpoint over here also and just reload the metadata for this particular service T01 that we are actually using. Load the metadata over here. Okay. So what we have to do right now is we are actually planning to just monitor the behavior. What is the behavior that we are actually getting? So we need the information for let's say PO entry set. Let's say PO entry set over here. From this PO entry set, let's just take the same example that we took today. Let's just pick this particular purchase order. Okay. And in this particular purchase order, we want some more information for the line item also. So for retrieving the information of line item, as I said, association is a kind of configuration thing, and the navigation is actual technical stuff that we would be using while retrieving any data. So we would be using the navigation name and not the association name while retrieving any sort of information. The keyword which we would be using is $expand equal to this. Whenever we press enter, let's just observe. So we are coming directly into the entity part, get entity method of the entry set, because we are passing the key parameter for that particular primary entity. So based on this, we are retrieving on the information from the header information. Now let's just press F8. So if you see, we are now the call is now being redirected to the get item entity set. So this is happening because we have defined a particular navigation between two entities. Now if you see, let's just go one step back to monitor what all information we are actually getting. In the stack, if we see what information we are getting in IT filter select option, we are getting nothing. But as the data is being passed in IT key tab over here, we are getting information DID as null and EBLN over here in IT key tab. So if you see the navigation component, the navigation path is also defined over here. It means we can make a particular entity to behave dynamically. So I'll just show you over here. In line item information, all we can say is, okay, give me information of a particular EBLN only if you are getting filter operation, and give me information navigation based if you are getting the navigation operations in the input. So what is the navigation operations we are getting over here? It's in the IT navigation part. So what we can do is we can define a condition. If IT navigation path is not initial, so what we did was we said, okay, if you are getting the get call, if you are getting the request to return the data based on a navigation thing, then do perform this logic. And if you are getting the direct call using the filter operations, then perform this logic. We can make our code behave as dynamically as possible. Okay. So if you are getting the request for the data via navigation, all we can do is a navigation path has been requested. So in the navigation path, what we are getting is a IT key tab. From this IT key tab, what we can get is a information from multiple components. That multiple component can behave as like LVDID also, and so we can define it as a YE0 underscore LT01 dash, it's a DID. So if we are having, if D underscore ID is not initial, then we might have pushed some data in the database, right, for that particular information. So if you are getting any sort of information in DID, then always retrieve the data from that particular custom table. So we can say that like select star from YE0 underscore LT01 into corresponding fields of table EP entity set, where EBLN is equal to LV EBLN and DID is equal to LV DID. Okay. But if I am not getting this particular information in DID, then I can select the data from EKPO into corresponding fields of table EP entity set. Again, I can define the same condition and copy it from here, paste it over here, and now all we are left to do it is we have to actually initialize the variable in case navigation path is not is defined. So we can read the key parameters. So what we can do is LVEBLN would be for us how we can retrieve the data from here. So if you see in IT key tab, we have two columns, name and the value. In name, there is something called DID, from where we would be getting the value for DID, and EBLN is something from which we would be getting the value for EBLN. So we can say value, we can say name equal to EBLN, and we can retrieve the value for value. We can make it as optional and pass it over here, and we can say DID equal to value over here, IT key tab, and the name we have would be taking over here would be DID. And as you can see, the EBLN value which we are getting over here is not having the leading zero, so we have to ensure that whenever before querying a particular database, we are getting all the information correctly. So what we can do over here is LVEBLN. We can use the alpha conversion routine over here. What did we just miss? DID is not known. What is the DID? It's not DID, it's LV underscore DID. And what else it is not able to identify? It's not able to identify DID because it is D underscore ID, and over here also it's D underscore ID. Anything else? Okay, D underscore ID is not known till runtime because it's EKPO, which won't be having any sort of DID. Okay, if the DID is there, then we would be passing the DID, else we won't be. Okay. Okay. So if you are getting all this information, then we would be doing this particular sort of operation. So let's just go over here, do a particular exit. Let's just again go into the system. Okay. Execute over here. Okay. So let's now monitor what is the behavior that we are getting. What is the input that we are passing over here? We are saying PO entry set, we are actually passing the value in PO entry set, that is a principal entity. We are not specifying the item entity or let's say dependent entity anywhere. We have just specified the name of the navigation. The name of the navigation we have specified over here, and after specifying the name of the navigation, we can we can monitor that the number of methods that will be called that would get triggered would be from header as well as the item entity, or you can say principal entity as well as the dependent entity. So we are getting the information from line item. The line item information we are receiving over here. Along with that, we are also getting the information from header line item also. So this particular information we can retrieve using the navigation component. Second, I would be discussing on is, let's say I have a particular header entity and I have a particular line item entity. Now assume a scenario in which whenever a user is coming over here, he can have a, let's say, refresh button over here. Let's say he is having a refresh button over here, and refresh button, upon a refresh button's click, what user is saying, if I have any kind of details updated over here, then just give me the updated information. So that particular refresh information, I want all the information to get retrieved from line item. Then in that case, I don't need a header information, because he's saying I don't want to update a header information, just get me the item level information only updated. So I can still use the relationship, but I don't need $expand. All I can use is a slash. So if I use slash, what I'll be getting is counting line information. But you see, I haven't directly called the line item entity set dollar by using $filter. As what I'm using is I'm using a primary principal entity's information, and I'm saying, hey, get the information of principal entity, and using the principal entity's key information, just navigate to the line item, and from that line item retrieve me the information of line item. Here, that is something you have to keep in mind while using. So the association and navigation. So if you are using $expand, sorry, my bad. If you are using $expand, then information of header as well as line item information would be retrieved. But if you are not using header and line item information, or you can say header entity, or you can say principal entity, question mark $expand equal to something new, but you are directly using principal entity slash navigation name, then you would be getting only the item data. So these are all the functionalities and maybe all the possible scenarios. It's all part of your backend and front-end developer communication. It's all work of cooperation. You can define all the logics over here, and then you have to tell your front-end developer saying, if you only want the line item information, you do not need to call this principal entity and expand entity like this. You can directly get the line item information by passing this particular relation. That's all he has to pass, because otherwise, like, he would be getting more data, and more data means more number of KBs. Like if I, let's say, talk about in a user's perspective, amount of data increase, right? If whenever amount of data increases, what it will consume is number of, or you can say amount of data in your data pack, or you can say amount of KBs, or you can say MBs, depends like what is the space or size of the data. So whenever a KB or MB of size of data actually increase, be it 10 KB or be it 100 KB or be it anything, ultimately it will actually download that particular information from that server, right? So this particular download activity will take some time, and ultimately it will slow down your application. So all you need to do is you should have a right set of knowledge to have a good or effective amount of communication or conversation with your front-end developer, and you should come up with a solution using which, or maybe using which you can you can minimal the transaction of data to as minimal as possible. So if the amount of data transaction has been limited, then your application would actually become faster, because it is just returning the item data and returning it. So let's say if I am returning header and item data, the amount of information would be, let's say, 200 KB. Then I'm not being too optimistic, but let's say if it has been reduced down to 150 KB also, that the time that would be spent for downloading this 50 KB of information would not be used, and hence your application will become that faster. Okay, so these are all the information or all the possibilities that you can use, and we have to use it accordingly. One more information or one more thing I would like to discuss over here is referential constraint is something that we just discussed, or let's say seen in a particular association. So in an association, there is something called referential constraint, right? So this referential constraint, like over here, we have a PO header information, PO line item information, and as both the information were related, we were able to retrieve its information. But this referential constraint is not 100% mandatory. You can, if the base rule is, if we are having relation for all the key parameter of principal entity to dependent entity, then you have to specify the referential constraint. But what if you have relation only a partial relation? Let's say if I don't specify this particular relation, let's just show it to you. If I don't specify this relation, I just remove this particular relation and have a syntax check, I would be getting an error, because all the keys of principal entity should be mapped if in referential constraint. So if you are specifying, you should be specifying all the relation, and if you are saying like I don't have a relation for, let's say, a DID parameter or any of the key parameter of a principal entity, you can directly remove this. And if you are not specifying any of the referential constraint, then it would be okay. You can't go by specifying only partial amount of information. You have to always specify full relation with full relation with respect to your principal entity. Principal entities, all the keys should get mapped to the any of the parameter of your dependent entity if you are specifying the referential constraint, and if you are not having all the relation for the principal to dependent entity, either specify all or don't specify any of the referential constraints at all. All the data would get linked from PO header to line item based on the property of navigation. So all you have to be sure is, if you are specifying, specify all the relation, else don't specify it. Okay. Next thing. So before jumping on to next part, I would just to ask, what is association, what is navigation, what is cardinality, and how and when we can use it? Are we all clear? Because ultimately the next topic that we would be discussing over here it should be get expanded. Yeah, it should be a get expanded entity, and this particular get expanded entity and create deep entity is actually going around this association and navigation, and all we are ensuring that we are not writing code in multiple methods, but we are implementing a single method in which we would be we should be able to transact data for all the multiple entities. So are we clear with the terminology association, navigation, and how and when can we use it? Bharti, Rakesh, Gaurav, Shweta, are you all clear?
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me, Shom?
Yeah. Please.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we are clear, right? Okay, fine. So we quickly go into portion get expanded entity and create deep entity. In between, if you are having any query, we would be actually discussing it the same. Okay. What is get expanded entity and the create deep entity? Let's just discuss it. So if you see over here, what we did just now is specified a association and a navigation. We specify a navigation over here, and as the name said, while retrieving the data, what we specified is a question mark $expand equal to the name of the navigation. So the method name also says the same. If you look closely, it says get expanded entity. What is expanded entity? Whenever a principal entity, if you see the skeleton, let's go into the skeleton. There is a properties, right? These are the properties. So let's look in a perspective, or let's say view of an ABAPer or a report developer. As an ABAPer, whenever we specify the types, so as I maybe mentioned in the beginning of the oData session, the entity is nothing but your let's say work area, or you can say type, and the entity set is nothing but your internal table or a database table or a tabular information, or you can say table type. Now I can have a deep structure also, right? So whenever I have a deep structure, I can have a singular property like this. I can have a property which can contain complex information. That particular complex information, we can consider it as a navigation property. So if you see from a vision of developing a report, what we would be able to identify is we have defined a types. We can like say types begin of type PO entry. We are defining all the information over here. We have one more property saying PO data nav, and its type is table type of this PO line item. So there is a kind of one entity which is carrying information of other entity, and it can have multiple lines of information. We are specifying table type of it. So this is a kind of complex structure that we are defining over here. And that information, if I want to retrieve data for all the information in a single go, I can have get expanded entity specified over here. And just to mention, by all experience and by this many years of working, what I know is it's the habit of using whenever you are using expand or navigations. More preferable way of doing the implementation, all those stuff won't be a individual method, but we would be defining a single method called get expanded entity, and we would be writing all the stuffs over there. So that is the main habit, get expanded entity and create deep entity, which we will be discussing further. So create deep entity would be nothing but we would be creating records for let's say PO header as well as in line item records on a single post call and not a multiple post call. That is what we call create deep entity. So let's first understand the create deep entity. So if you go over here, if you go one step back and if you see, we have a class, this class as a parent class. From the parent class, there are multiple methods which are getting inherited. We were till now focusing on only this method, right? So along with that methods, there are certain methods which are in addition or on top of it are also available for let's say multiple communication or multiple functionalities. Few of those are let's say application runtime information. So these are application server runtime methods. If you see, we can have let's say create stream or create entity or let's say get stream information. All those are media related information. Another one we have get expanded entity. This get expanded entity is ultimately the one which we would be actually focusing on. The get expanded entity is nothing but an entity using which we can retrieve information from multiple entities in a single go. So what we did was we just click on click a right click and just redefine the method as we were defining the all the rest of the methods that we defined till now. Okay, so if I go one step back, if I check, I can see well, one method has been redefined that is called get expanded entity, that is coming from this interface. This interface is nothing but an interface of our DPC class, and hence we are getting this particular method. So in this get expanded entity, let's just look closely what all information we are getting over here. So maybe what all information you would be getting over here, you would be find it very similar to the get entity set that we defined earlier. We are having now IT key tab over here. We are getting the returning data information over here. But if you see closely, the information specified here are very generic. Like just to give you a brief, let's say if I go in get entity over here. In get entity, if you see ER entity is of type what? TSPO entry. So this TSPO entry, if I go over here and check what is a TSPO entry, TSPO entry is of type TSPO entry, and it is actually, I mean, depending on the structure YE0T01 that we are actually using at the definition at the time of definition of any gateway entity. But over here, if you see the get expanded entity, the ER entity is nothing but its returning parameter, right? It's the exporting parameter ER entity in which we will be passing all the returning data. It is type referred to data. It means it's a very generic type for all the kind of navigation. Let's say if I have a particular application, on an application, I have a particular 5 sub applications defined in which I have 15 navigations defined. Then all the coding for that particular 15 navigation we can do in get expanded entity for all the retrieval of data. And that type of the data we will be converting it dynamically to the ER entity, and maybe we will be passing assigning the values of the returning structure to ER entity, and it would start displaying on the output. And this IO expand is nothing but the expand clauses that we would be getting in the input. Okay, so what we would be doing over here is we would be defining a structure of a returning parameter as well as the input parameter, and that input parameter we would be picking it in the input parameter and will processing it. So let's just go step by step to get it more clear. Okay, so we have get expanded entity, right? So in get expanded entity, as the name suggests, it's not an entity set, it's an entity. So whenever we have entity set, first we would need to determine the input, determine the input we are getting. Okay, so for that, let's just activate this particular method, put a breakpoint over here, go over here and press and enter over here. So if you see, we are directly coming into get expanded entity. This get expanded entity has multiple input parameters. So this get expanded entity is getting triggered from here. It has a, let's say, entity set name, the target entity set name, and all the stuff. The thing which we are actually of our interest is what is the input we are getting in IT key tab. So in IT key tab, we would be getting the key tab information. So we are getting the key tab information over here. So that is something of our use. So what we will be doing over here is we would be reading the information that from that particular header tables by using this particular key information, and we would be passing it forward to the line item information. So all we need to do is we need to first determine the input key information, and that input key information, if you see over here, we are getting it in IT key tab. So let's just define. Okay. we are like picking the directly value of EBLN over here, and we would need the value parameter for it. Let's make it optional. We would be getting just the information of DID. Okay. So this particular DID information we would be using it over here. So once we have the required information, now all we need to do is we have to fill a return structure. Let's define a return structure saying data, let's say ls output data, and its type would be let's say we define it as a ty output data. So we first need to define a type. This is nothing but a data declaration. Now we would doing the type definition. So there are multiple rules for type definition. We would be discussing all of them one by one. So let's say if I want to define a particular type of returning data, what we would be doing is we would be simply defining a type like the begin of ty output data. Okay, and then we would be directly using its type of the header entity. So what would be the type of header entity for us? We can say include type, and we would be directly using the MPC class, because we said earlier DPC is nothing but your data provider class, MPC is nothing but your model provider class. The model provider is the one in which all the models is nothing but the interface is nothing but the skeleton of your all the entity has been stored. So we can say YCL, YE0. I am just reading this from here only. So if you see, the naming convention would be same for all the classes. E01 underscore MPC we are having. From this MPC, it has a property TS, and we want header data from PO entry set. So I just include the type from there, and now I want a line item information. So that particular line item information. Now one more rule. So that particular name of the particular line item set should be that of the particular navigation. So it should be PO data new. That is how the name should look alike, and its type should be, let's say I can say TT of line item, and I can like and the particular type. Okay, now TT line item is not defined anywhere. So what I can do is I can define a type for line item. I can say types of particular line item would be let's say TT line item, and its type would also come from the same class in which is actually providing us all the class information. So we can say YCL, YE0, T01, and MPC. This MPC class would ultimately give us the TS and line item set. This line item set, as we are defining, and as I already mentioned, these types are defined very generically, so we have to define its key. But as we don't have key, what we can use it like with default key that we already discussed in the Web 7.4 lecture. So this is the basic skeleton of ls output data. So let's just check the syntax. So we are all good. Let's just put a breakpoint over here to monitor what is the structure of the output type we are getting over here. So I'll just cancel this, press and enter over here. Okay, so we just define a type for output data. This output data is nothing but a structure, because we would be getting only one information or one line of information we would be returning. So ls output data is getting all the information from the field, and the type of the information is like it's getting information from the header information that we included as a include type, and the line item information would be a table type, and that table type would be containing all the line item information like this. Okay, and this is all we would be using. Okay, next thing our ultimate target is, so here we have all the header information we have all the input information what everyone is passing. Now what is the target? Target is using the inputs. Using the input, we have to fill the return structure, or you can say output structure. Okay, what is the input? We have EBLN and DID, and we have to fill the output information this. So maybe if we like quickly go into flashback, we are also getting the same information over here. In PO header entity, we were getting the not PO header entity, that's the wrong set. I was getting PO entry set. I was getting the same information over here. I was getting all the entity information, and using this information, I was actually getting header data, and from PO line item set, I was getting the information for this key parameter, the same key parameter, and I was filling the returning structure ET entity set. The only twist over here is we won't be filling two different tables, but we would be filling a one single returning structure over here. So that is the only thing that is being deferred in this particular method. So what we would be doing is, if we have LVDID is initial, then we would be getting data from let's say standard table. So let's get data from first table, let's say EKKO. Select star from let's say EKKO into table. Ultimately, we won't be needing all the information. We would be needing limited number of information. So let's just pick information from there. These are all the standard fields that we are actually currently using. Let's use the inline declaration where EBLN is equal to LV EBLN. So once we have the LV EBLN and everything was specified over here, we have the header information. So we can say if we have the header information already retrieved, then fetch the line item information. Okay. So what we can do is we can specify the line item information. So what would be the line item information for us? It will be coming from LP01.
Sumit, we can go with a work area, right? We will, however, be having a single PO in EKKO.
Yeah, that would also be good. Yeah, let's optimize this. Let's use the select single. Yeah, that would be good. Perfect. Yeah. Thanks for your input, Pati. Yeah. Okay. Next thing we would be doing over here is we would be returning, getting the line item information. Are we left with any field? Yes, we are left with any INS. So yeah. And over here, as EBLN can have multiple values, let's define a table from EKPO into table @data LP KPO. So this, let's make it LS for work area. Okay. So we have all the information specified over here. So what we can do is now we can fill the target structure, fill the output structure. So we can use move corresponding from ls EKKO to, let's say, ls output data. What it will do is it will fill all the matching parameters. We have used the same name for all the fields into the target structure. Sometimes what happens is whenever we are creating any sort of custom data storage or custom table, we might rename the fields. So for that, we can use the as keyword also. Let's say if I have created a field for company code, I can use like company code over here. And if I'm using as company code and I'm using move corresponding, then it would jump onto the correct target field. That is also possible. Okay. Next thing we would be doing, as we have already moved the work area information for the header information, let's move the line item information. So we would be using LT EKPO to ls output data, and that ultimate target structure would be the name of the entity, name of the navigation. So this is something which we would be doing. Okay. So this is all the information we have moved, but till the internal work area level. But internal work area is not something which is actually accessible from the outside, right? All we have to ensure that we are passing all the information from here till the output structure. So what we have to do is we have having any sort of information over here. Okay, then. Pardon. Sorry, my bad. There's some, yeah, perfect. Okay. Okay. So we would be copying the data to ER entity. So let's say if I say move corresponding ls output data to ER entity, the ER entity is of type ER entity is not a structure or an internal table. It's very generic. It's defined as a type referred to data. So we can't use move corresponding over here. All we can do is we can use one more utility method that has been provided by SAP to copy data to data reference. And that method we can name it as a copy data to reference. Okay. So here ultimately our input field would be whatever is of type, whatever input we are providing over here, the data in the field in which we are having data, and the ER entity is the one in which actually we want to fill the data. And if you see the copy data to REF, let's just observe what it is doing. It's just directly assigning it to the output variable. And if you see its type is very defined as generic type. So we can directly pass the value by using that particular method. Okay. So once we have the data already populated over here, let's see, are we getting the correct or not? So if I put a breakpoint over here, let's just press and enter. Okay. And if you see the get expanded entity is getting triggered, at end of it, ls output data, this ls output data is having all the header information as well as the line item information. But the more interesting part, post that is, if I press F8, I am again getting into get entity set, line item information. So let's do one thing. Let's just do a trick. Your line item information over here, and over here your line item information, as we don't have a DID. Let's just do a trick and play around with the data sometime. Or we can say. Sorry, SAP server is behaving a bit slow. Sorry. Yeah. So let's just copy this 509 because we are passing 505. We just want to ensure that whatever data we are getting is from the correct source. So what we can do is we can directly comment this LVEBLN, like for the tasting purpose or like for the understanding purpose. I am just passing it hard coded. So we can monitor in the output if you are getting the data from for 509, it's coming from get entity set, and if you are getting it from the particular 505, then we are getting the data from our. Over here, if you see, we are getting data from 09. Why? Because like we already redefined and passing the data from get expanded entity, and still we are getting the information from line item set. And either there are two ways. Like first of all, whenever we are doing any sort of redefinition for get expanded entity, we are using the method of expansion. Ideally, it's advisable not to redefine the individual methods if it's not required. Even if it's like being passed, what we have to do is we have to pass the expansion clause, and we have to like let's say for this particular header entity, okay, PO entry data. Let's say I have 5 navigations defined. Let's say from input, let's say I am only passing the one navigation because I need data only for one navigation. So I am not passing all the 5 navigations. So we have to give the data in return for only that particular navigation and give it in a register or somewhere that okay, I am returning the data only for this particular navigation. So consider the get expanded entity for that particular navigations and refer the individual for the rest of them. So what we can do is we can check in the signature. We have something called ET expanded technical clauses. So this ET expanded technical clauses is nothing but a technical clauses that will contain the expansion clauses that we are actually getting in the input. So if I press and enter over here, in the get expanded entity, IO, there would be something called IO expand. This IO expand is nothing but coming from IO expand node, and this IO expand node would be having multiple children with empty children, and this empty children is actually carrying the information of the whatever navigation information we are actually passing. So this navigation information we would be using further. So how we would be using it now? So after passing, like as we are passing the data, before that we have to specify for what all clauses you want me to consider the data. So we have to fill expand tech clauses. So what we can do over here is, if we are getting the data from IO expand is not initial, then what we can do is we can retrieve the data from for all the navigations. From where we can retrieve it, I already mentioned we can retrieve from IO expand dash. We'll getting it from its children level. It's IT children level, empty children. So that particular children, it's showing in red, it means it's a primary component. So we can directly get the children using a property, but we have a particular method get children from where we can get the list of navigations, and we can populate the navigations in the output, like for what all navigations the data is requested and for what all we are actually passing. And we don't need clause, we need technical clause, because technical clause is something which is in technical term. Let's say if I talk about this, we are passing EBLN. So if you specify N in capital over here, it won't work because it's a non-technical term, property level information. So if you use technical property somewhere, that particular technical property won't be case sensitive. Okay. So what we can do over here is we can use a technical clause and directly pass the information from here, and for LS navigations to in we can iterate on the LT navigation, and all we need to pass the data for is a navigation property. So let's say ls navigation, and what it is having is there is something called technical navigation property name. So that is something that we will be using. We have specified ET expanded technical clauses. This ET expanded technical clauses is coming with the name of the technical clause for which we are actually getting the data. And if you see, the breakpoint is now not holding the PO entry set, PO line item set on which it was actually holding earlier. Okay, so over here PO line item set, we are earlier getting the breakpoint. Why we are getting the breakpoint? Because the method was getting executed, and we have specified 509 over here. But if you see the data now we are getting over here is 505. And now why we are not getting the execution for this method is because we have explicitly specified that whatever data is being requested for this particular navigation, which actually input is actually requesting by the URI component. This is the URI, right? Request URI. So in this URI we are getting PO data navigation. For this navigation, whatever data has been requested, that request is being fulfilled by the get expanded entity. So we are explicitly specifying, don't go in individual method, just strictly refer to the method which I am passing over here, and that's why we are specifying the expanded technical clauses. So these are the main terms. So if you directly retrieve the data and everything you are doing over here, but you are not mentioning ET expanded technical clauses over here, the data won't be reflected correctly into the output, because the system is not knowing the get expanded entities output for what all entities that you are actually feeding the data. So you should be specifying that feeder, and that particular feeder is nothing but a technical clauses that you should be specifying over here, and hence using a single method get expanded entity we are receiving the we are able to feed the data. Second most important thing, currently the project we have actually defined here is very minimal, of a very minimal size. Like it is having only one header and line item information. It is having only one navigation. But will a real-time project would be having this like minimal number of items? No, right? I can have 15 navigations. I can have 3 principal entities. Let's say those 3 principal entities. For all those 3 principal entities, I want to ensure that I am able to effectively use the get expanded entity clause over here. So for that, we have to give an identity for which entity set we are actually writing the clauses. So if you see over here, in read expanded entity, we have something called IV entity set name, or you can say, yeah, over here, IV entity set name, and this particular entity set name or source name, we have to specify in a case statement, or you can say conditions over here, because over here, if you see in PO line item set also, we are having kind of entity set names and all, but this entity set's name, I won't be getting any call from other entity over here. So it's not mandatory or like to use it somewhere. If there are some scenarios like we were using navigation paths and all, we can use it like what is the source name from we are getting the call. But over here, the same method can be used for multiple purpose. So it's very much important to specify for which source we are actually satisfying the data information. Because this output data is for PO line item information. Tomorrow you would be getting the data information for, let's say, purchase requisition level of information. So you should be specifying the case statement over here. So all we can do over here is we can directly go into the change mode, and we can say, okay, this particular code which I have written is very much applicable to only a particular entity set, whenever a particular primary entry set, because here what you will be getting is a primary entity set name only, the PO entry set. PO line item set won't be specified anywhere. So this is one of the good habit, because sometimes what happens is, like, if there is a quick requirement of a minor project, you will directly do the coding for your code openly in get expanded entity and send it to the production. Tomorrow, let's say there is one more requirement coming and you are defining one more navigations and you are writing some code just after this. It won't get executed correctly at the first place. Secondly, whatever thing was working fine earlier, after your changes, it will stop working. So it is very much important to specify for what scenario you are actually doing your coding. So you have to specify the entity set name over here, and after this you would be getting the correct output. If you see IV entity set, this entity set is having PO entry set value, and hence it will get executed. So if I use get expanded entity set for some another, and if I have not done the implementation, it won't get executed. But ultimately it won't get executed for a wrong input or for a wrong entity for which it hasn't been retrieved. We can retrieve the data for multiple entities in a single call. So are we all clear? I am just, yeah, Bharti, Rakesh, Gaurav, Shweta, are we all clear of use of get expanded entity, how and when we should be using it and its uses?
Yeah, Sumitra.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Like, it's 10:15. So let's have a 5 minutes break. Let's again gather back at 10:20, and we'll cover the rest of the topic, the create deep entity and the generic handlers, post that break 10:20. Okay. So let's just gather back at 10:20. Okay. Thank you. Hello. Okay. Are we all back? So we can start and finish the rest of the topic for today's session. Okay. So now, hello. Can you all hear me? Parthi, Gaurav, Shweta, Rakesh. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, yeah. So now we can go with the rest of the topics for today's session. Okay. Okay. So yeah. So the thing which we are left with for today's session is create deep entity. Okay. So let's just first have an overview of what it is. So I'll just quickly log in back into the system. So as we all know, we already did an implementation for PO entry set using which we can, let's say, upon click of create button, we are first retrieving the information for PO item, and upon click of save button, we are again inserting information for the PO information. Now, if you want to do the same for like multiple information, let's say if you have header information as well as line item information, like what we did for the get call, like we implemented multiple get calls, same way we could have implemented multiple post calls. So those multiple post call would again go into individual backend level processing and would do an particular perform an entry in the backend tables and then will give us the output. But what here otherwise we should have done is like get expanded entity, which we have for getting multiple information in a single go. We have something called create deep entity, which is actually uh, kind of on the same way as that of the get expanded entity. Whenever two or more entities are related or are in relation with each other using expand clauses, or you can say navigations, we can implement the create deep entity, and in which we would be getting all the data at a time, and we can use those particular data and that particular data in a single go and do all sort of insert or modifications operations that we want to do in a single method rather than implementing two different create methods. So for that, what we need to do is we have to implement the create deep entity method of APPL service runtime. So we can directly go in APPL service runtime, redefine this particular method, and come over here. Okay. So let's just monitor over here. What is the data we are getting over here? So here we have multiple data which we are currently receiving, but to the main thing that we are actually should be focused on is that saying PO entry set we already created. Whenever we are getting any information for post operation, what we did was we use the data provider over here. We are reading the data, and from the data provider, after reading the data, we are defining the new primary key or new key for the DID number, and we are inserting the data into table, the header table. Same way we should have or we could have done in the line item also. But if we observe the same in the create deep entity, we have something called data provider over here too. So this data provider can also give us the type, or you can say the data which actually we are getting from the input, and that we can use it in the output sections. So let's just quickly go over here in the service level and see how we can post the data for multiple entities. So let's just quickly check into the system. Okay, over here clause for this, not let's say this. Okay, what I did earlier, maybe in create entity, you would be remembering, I just pass this particular information, I am getting this particular information, and I use this for post call. Then how I delimited the post call was, I just use this use as request button. So whatever kind of data you are comfortable with, you can convert it into that particular kind of data. There is an XML. If you are comfortable with more you are using JSON, you can use $$ filter equal to JSON, and you would be getting the data in JSON format. Then you can use as request, and the data you would be having over here. Over here, you can use the post call, and as we already mentioned, in post call we won't be specifying anything, not a format, JSON, nothing, and not also the primary key. So we can remove this from here and directly do the post call. So post call will actually pass the information and generate an entry for this particular. So this particular post call will create an entry for this. So the number which would get generated. So this is a simple post call which is actually carrying the information for only one entity. Now what if we have a requirement of creating a or entering information in multiple tables, or we can say entering multiple data on a single post call? Then we can go by the same step that we have done earlier. We can directly let's say as we have multiple line items in this particular PO, I am more focused on like referring this PO. So let's say if I have particular, okay, and I have $X1, and I am getting the data for this particular PO. So I am getting the data for this particular PO, and it's line items in a single go. How? Because we implemented the get expanded entity for this particular item, and we can convert it into JSON. So we have the JSON level information. So if you see, we have header information which would be at the end, and we have the line item information. Okay, so sorry, in JSON the header information would be at top and line item information or the navigation information would be at the bottom. So this is how it would look like. Now all we need to do is we want to insert an entry into this particular navigation clause. So I can put a breakpoint and see what all information we are getting over here. For that what we can do is we can like use this use as request over here. So it will copy all the input information we are getting from here. So what we did was what a front-end developer would have done is he would have passed a particular PO number that we already did. To get the information from this multiple fields, he would have triggered a get call, and after doing the get call, he would have binded all the information over here. That's what we already did. We already binded this information. Then for this custom fields, a user might have passed some input. So let's just pass some input. Let's say C1, or you can say C2, and on timely delivery flag, let's set it as true if you want. And the PO data line item information, we are getting this over here. And if you want to do any sort of manipulation, then we can do. If you don't want to, then we can directly pass it. So this is our payload. This is the data that we want to load into the system. That is why we call it payload. So our payload is ready. All we are actually left to do it is we want to load the data into the system. So we can directly, the base condition for the post call will always remain same. Create call can never contain a key in the header level. All it can contain is a body parameter, and all those body parameter is nothing but a payload that we can pass. So this payload information we can remove from here the key parameters that we are actually using, and we can click on post call and we can execute. So if you see, we are directly reaching into create deep entity. As of now, it's not implemented, so yeah, we won't be getting any sort of output as of now. But why we are here is to monitor the information we are getting actually at the input level. So if you see, we have something called data provider over here. We have multiple entity sets. So as I already discussed in the get expanded entity, we can have get call for multiple entity. Likewise, we have a post call for multiple entities using expand. So whenever you are using create deep entity, we would be using this case clause, or you can say if any kind of conditioning in which we can write our set of code. The data provider would be giving us all the data. This is the raw data. We have a method using which we can convert it into the actual data that we are getting over here. Clear? So let's just start writing the code. Okay. So all we need to do is, like, just to save the time, all we need to do is we need to read the data from input. So let's say read input data. Read input data. For that, I already mentioned we have something called data provider. So from data provider, we can have IO data provider, and that data provider would be having a method called read entry data. This read entry data we would be receiving from this read entry data we would be receiving the input value. Now this read entry data would need a type. So that type would be same as that of the type we define in the particular get expanded entity. So we can directly either copy it from here, one way. Second way would be you could have defined it at the types level. Over here at the types level, you could have defined type. At attribute level, you would have defined ls input data, or you can say ls po input data, whatever kind of declaration, like a local declaration or a global declaration, whatever you are actually comfortable in, you can do that sort of declarations. So, okay. So what we did was we just define a particular type. We getting line number 16. Okay, yeah, because we haven't specified a variable over here. So as we know, we have a ls input data over here, because there is something, the data which we are getting into input. So I have just renamed it to the input data. Okay, so we are good to go. Let's just activate it and put a breakpoint over here, and I can directly enter. I can press an F6, and if you see in ls input data, I am getting all the information which is being passed from the payload over here. The individual fields information, the C1, C2 and all the custom fields which are being passed, and the PO data which is with the fields which actually being passed from the input at the navigation level. So we are getting data at deep level along with the header and the line item entity. We are getting the informations. Okay. So once we have all the data, all we are left to do it is we have to push the data to the database. So what we can do is to save some time. What we can do is we can directly refer the create entity. On create entity, what we were doing is we have a particular header information already defined over here, and in this header information, because we have two tables, right, in which we would be doing the table entries. So I can directly copy this, insert date entry into DB. I can say header table. Okay, and this header table would be of type list T01, and its type would be YE0 underscore T01. Okay. Next thing we would be needing is LT E0 line item. So LT01. So we would be doing it as a like YE0. Sorry, type standard table of YE0 L. No, yeah, it's a database table only. Okay, fine. So we can define the structure like this. So we have the data ready over here. All we have to do is we have to fill the header work area. So we can directly use move corresponding from ls input data to ls e0 t01. What thing it won't be having is our two fields, ls e0 something and mandate, the client field. So let's fill the client field over here. And next thing we would be doing it is we would be determining the value of the number which would get generated dynamically. That is, the create entity was having the maximum maximum ID that was declared, and we were using it. So we can directly copy this particular logic to save the time. Okay. So like just to again give you a quick walkthrough, what we did was we just moved the data from here to here. We are passing EBLN into database and checking what is the maximum DID that has been generated for this particular purchase order. Because let's say if I have a particular purchase order, if for EBLN a D001 was already generated, 2 was generated, then next ID we would be generating is 3. Same way we are getting the maximum ID, splitting it. After splitting it, we are directly converting the number into a particular D dash something ID. So we are just redetermining the DID. We might be needing some data declaration, which is declared at the top. So we would be directly using that particular data declaration part for our ease of use. Okay. So let's just check, are we all good, or like is the syntax correct? Okay, so we are good. The syntax is correct. What we did was we just define a particular input data, which is actually retrieving the data using data provider and all those stuff. One thing which I just missed and that we actually declared, discussed in the earlier, that we would be needing an input entity set name for which we would be doing all this stuff. So we would be needing a case. Now we can define entity set name, but in some of the methods or somewhere you would be finding the name written as obsolete. So it's up to you, like this is obsolete, so maybe in future SAP might remove this all the entity sets and all individual information it is providing. So we can directly use the technical request context. This is nothing but the request context we are receiving at technical level, and it has certain methods which can return as the name of the entity set. So what we can do is we can, either way would work as of now, but not sure, maybe in future SAP removes the individual variable, so we can use the get entity set. In get expanded entity, I use directly the input data I am getting. Here I am getting the via method. You can use either way you are comfortable with. So what we can do is we can directly write the IO technical request provider, and here you can get the name of the entity set. Okay, so this name of the entity set should be same as that of the name that we use over here, the PO entry set, because we would be getting all the requests on the header set. If you see over here, we are getting the request triggered on the header set. So that's why we will be using over here. Okay, so what we just did was we just ensure that the data is coming for correct entity set, get the data. After getting the data, we pass it into a work area, and into the work area, we just determine the new DID that is getting generated. So the data has now been inserted into a header entity, header database table. Next thing, let's insert data into line item table. So what we can do over here is this is the table, right? LTE0, LTT01. So we can directly fill internal table. Move corresponding. What data we are actually getting is ls input data dash. We are directly getting the data from navigation. The navigation name of the navigation is this. Then we can directly pass it into an internal table. And we have to just insert the same into a internal table. For that, what we can do is insert ye0 t01. Before that, we are left to do one thing that we would be doing in short while. So we have why it is not setting the data from that particular table. The type of database and table work area is not Unicode convertible. Okay, we are trying to insert information in a header table and not the line item table. That's why let's information. Perfect. We are good. We are able to insert the information in a line item table. So we are clear. Now, all thing we are left to do is like we are getting the information over here. If you see, we don't have a DID determined over here. So we have to pass the DID over here because we won't be getting it. We won't be getting it into a payload information. Okay. So update. Let's say DID. What we can do is loop at LTE0. Yeah. You can say item, and over here LFS item would be having something called DID, and we would be assigning it value from the LVDID because we have already determined the new value in LVDID that we are already using over here. LVDID. Just to ensure that we are getting the correct information, let's just comment this out, like the database insert clause that we are doing over here, because it's advisable to check the internal work area date level data we are getting, internal local variable level data we are getting before inserting it to a database. So what we can do is we can directly press enter over here, and after pressing an enter, we can directly go at the end if we are having a breakpoint. Yeah, we are having a breakpoint. So if you see over here, we have LSE01, and over here we are and second thing we are actually trying to retrieve over here is the LTE01 because these are the two tables that we will be focusing on. So we have D all 01 already determined over here because we don't have it in the table already. So this information is getting determined, and at the line item level also we have inserted the maybe we just missed passing the SI mandate. Sometimes it's not mandatory, but it's a good habit to pass the value of the field always, else system will automatically determine SI mandate. It's not a big thing, but it's a good habit to pass all the fields detail on your own. Okay. So once we have all the information specified over here, I can directly insert it into a database. Okay, one thing. I can activate it. One more thing I would like to emphasize over here is, if you see in the create entity, after posting the data, we were returning somewhere in the ER entity. Same way, let's discuss it over here. After clicking on create and a save, let's say if the user is willing to still stay on the same screen and you want to do any sort of modifications over here, then the data which we would be having over here should have the DID or all the kind of runtime information that we actually generated at the post call level reflected in the output over here. So the front end screen will get refreshed, the data will get rebind, but all we need to ensure that we are retaining the right set of information in the output parameter, and that particular output parameter would ultimately give the data to the backend, to the front end again, and all the step that we would that they can skip is, let's say if I have a screen which is getting loaded for the first time, I'll trigger a get call, so it will give me initial information. On click of save, I will create I'll trigger a post call. Post call will save all the information. Then again, to get all the updated information, then again they'll trigger a get call. But it's not a good habit. So what we can do is, on the click of save on a post call, we can directly return them the information, updated information. So this is something that we can also return in the its returning structure. That is something what we call the sorry, we are in the create entity. In the create deep entity, we have something called ER deep entity. So this deep entity we can actually return to the particular output structure. So what we have to do is we have to define one more structure. ls output data, its type would be ty output data. Okay. So output, ultimately, these kind of a test programs I have done it, like else you would have done like ty data. So it will input and output would also be of same format, because we are having trying to make it as uniform as possible. Okay. So now we would be filling the returning structure. So what we can then do is fill returning parameter, and over here we can directly move corresponding the first, let's fill the header information. So we can fill the ls e0 t01 because it is having all the updated DID information to ls output data, and we can move corresponding the lt e0 lt01 to ls output data and dash PO data navigation, because it's the navigation. Now we can, as you already know, we already discussed that like it's a reference, so we can't directly pass the data, but we can copy to data reference. So we can, what we can do is copy data to ref and directly use it over here. We can directly pass the ls output data and give it over here. Sorry, ER. We have, pardon, we have ER deep entity over here. And when we have a particular create deep entity, it's advisable to remove the implementation for individual call. So like to make it work even smoother, and like if you see create deep entity, what it is doing now is we have create deep entity which is getting triggered, and we have data inserted over here. So once we have the data implemented over here, we are okay. We have the information for this 2 line item already posted in this particular query. Now, same way we can check into the header table. For this 505, we have one entry posted. So as we have already defined the create deep entity, this method won't get triggered. So it's good to remove the overhead from the system, and we can delete the implementation if you want. So we have redefined, and you can directly PO entry set and delete the redefinition. But I'm not deleting, just to, if you want to refer it sometime in future or while doing your hands-on, you would find it handy. So that's why I'm not deleting it. Okay, fine. So once we have all the information available, next thing as a developer which you would be doing, because that's a simple ABAP. So I feel just to inform you, let's just complete the flow. What we did was, we were in the initial report screen. User actually to mention a delivery for a particular purchase order, they click on a create button. On a click of create button, they are getting a pop-up for purchase order. They are passing the purchase order. They are using the expand clause and getting header and line item information in a single go. They are clicking on save button. All the data is getting posted using a create deep entity call. Post that, we are actually getting the returning them updated information in the same returning output. But now let's say there is a close button also. User is closing the screen, again going back over here. There might be one more entry, let's say D all 01 EBL and 2. Consider this as a new purchase order that we just inserted. Now what if they want to change or view something over here? So if they click on change or view, again that particular system, again the get expanded entity will get triggered. So what we have to do over here is, as we already mentioned, the ls lv id is initial, then get the I mean, if we are not getting any sort of did, then pass the get the information from standard table that we already did and pass the information over here. All we are left to do is you can directly go into the change mode, and if you see, it doesn't have any sort of else part defined. So you have to do the implementation of this particular else part, that if you have already DID in your system, then you have to return the data into by referring to that particular input table. So what we can do is, we can directly this will ultimately complete your whole application. For a list report, there are object page and all those stuff is kind of pretty usual. Whenever we are getting the data from let's say YE0 T01, or you can write it like YE0 T01. We specified ELN over here, YE0 LT01. Saying we can specify it as a all the things that you have to pass over here is the DID. As we are using host escape character, we have to use it everywhere. Okay, and we can directly pass the information that we are getting from here to the YE0201 YE0. So going forward, it will get all the data from this particular table only. So what they can do is link has already been generated for us, so we can directly use this particular link. Let's write it down. I'm not able to copy it anyhow, not sure why. Here you can pass the PO number. The file 05. 505 over here, and that particular 505. First of all, let us just check, are we getting the information correct? Okay. So this dollar expand, and as we try to create the click on post button and then we press and enter, that's why we are getting this method is not allowed, because post method doesn't take a key. And here we'll need a particular DID as a DAll01. So we are getting the data from the transactional table now. Maybe we haven't passed the we haven't selected the DID over here, that's why we are not getting it. But if we pass the DID over here, then we would be getting it. So I'll leave it up to you. Maybe we can mention it over there. Next thing that they can do is something that we have to implement. Then you can take it as a homework, and maybe we can do just to save our time and learn something new. That as we have a particular post call which we are receiving over here doesn't have a DID, let's say specified. Let's say if I use it, this is a request, and if I am not receiving a DID, it means it's a new post call in which we are actually trying to create a new entry. So what we can do over here is we can directly write after getting the data, we can specify if ls input data dash DID is initial, then of course we need to determine the DID. But what if they already have a DID? I mean the primary key already determined. Then what you have to do is you have to just directly write an else clause. If the DID is has already been specified, you can take the data into work area, and rather than writing insert clause, you can directly write the modify clause on this particular to database table and get the data inserted. And that's how you can support the front-end developers request for a change request, because in change request they would be getting a DID, and on the post call in the payload also they would be passing the DID value. So this DID value referring to which you can directly update the data in the same entry, and you do not need to create a new entry, and that's how the delete operation will work. So that's something, it is pretty much core ABAP, and any ABAPer can do it. So maybe you can consider it as a homework. Okay. So that is something create deep entity and get expanded entity that we discussed. So I would like to unmute you all and ask if you have any query, or like, are we clear till now? What are you all clear on whatever changes or whatever functionality that we implemented till now using get expanded and create deep entity?
ज़्यादा टाइम नहीं लगा पर्सन बनने में, ज़्यादा टाइम नहीं लगा.
Are you all clear? Okay.
Hello.
So
Sumit.
yeah, please.
Yeah, I was asking whether we would get the notes regarding this. What means for definition purpose?
Like you can directly refer we'll be sharing you the training videos, because if as per our experience, what we all know is if you directly read a coding is not a reading exercise. All you need to do is you have to follow it. So we'll be sharing you recording. You have all those stuff, and you can try to replicate it at yourself. And if you are running into any issue, I am there to help you. And maybe regarding the kind of material and stuff, you can reach out to Rahul or Sandeep, to whomever maybe you are connected with. Because as per
here.
You can unmute yourself and please speak up, because I am getting some other noise, so I have muted all of you. Yeah, please.
Right, Sumit, Bharti here.
Bharti, please.
Do you mind me asking your total experience in this particular area, like oData and all?
So, like I can say I have more than 7 years of experience in ECC, HANA. I have done all the sort of greenfield and implementation, data migration projects and all those stuff. So I have done a certain HANA implementations and all those stuff, and from where maybe I got an experience and exposure on this particular activities.
Okay, great. Sumit, you know what? I was actually thinking, this is my first class, so I'm not so sure how it has been taken up till now. What I would like to understand is, how will we be receiving the assignments? I mean, I do not want to just go through the video and replicate the stuff what you have done. Instead, I would like to put my hands on from the very beginning based on the requirement that you give, something like a functional specification. In the sense, you have so much of experience in that area, right? So you would have done a lot of real-time. You might have fulfilled a lot of real-time requirements. So it would be great if you can please specify some of the things to us where you can just split them into different assignments, which will be covering each and every part that we have discussed.
We try to meet your expectation, but the thing is it's a 40 hours of session, so we won't be able to cover all of them now. But yeah, I'll be discussing this with Rahul, and maybe we can collaboratively design an assignment and maybe forward it to you in near future. So yeah, you can go by yourself onto it, and if you are running into any issue, then we are here to help you.
Okay, great, Sumit.
Okay,
thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, so today we are able to cover association, navigation and all those stuff. So maybe CRUD queue operation we already covered in last lecture, so you all should be comfortable by using this. And what you can do is you can do hands-on exercise on the same stuff or any kind of example that you can think of in your project, whichever is going on as of now. And the remaining part, the generic handler and the maybe media part handling and all that we would be covering into the upcoming lecture, that is tomorrow. And we would be discussing that and the maybe developers tool, how the traces and all should be applied, so that we can cover into the upcoming lectures. So thank you all of you for joining. We can call it a day, and maybe tomorrow we can again gather back and cover the remaining part in the oData stuff. So yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot all of you for joining, and maybe we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Sumit.
Yeah, I was asking that get expanded entity, create deep entity, what questions usually they ask?
So all they can ask is the stuff which I actually showed you. Like if I have already a get expanded entity implement, let's say if I have an entity, if I have a parent-child relationship, principal and dependent entity relationship defined, I have a navigation in place. What if I have implemented the entity set name over here for like that particular clause, and I have individual methods already implemented? Then which particular implementation will get triggered? What is the place where I should be writing the logic? So all your answer should be, it all depends on where you actually want to execute the get the logic get executed. If you want the logic of that particular relation, let's say navigation, to get executed on a get expanded entity, then you have to specify it in a technical clauses. Let's say if there are some navigation for which you haven't done the implementation over here and you have individual implementation specified over here, then you have to ensure that in the expanded clause that particular navigation is not being passed. Then most thing in which every developer is actually stuck up on, maybe there are very limited blocks and people are not actually getting on a gateway client. How can you taste that like whatever create dependency you have implemented is working fine, because people are not from where or in what format they should be passing the data in payload in this particular gateway client. So something you have to first, even though let's say if you are like implementing just a post call, it's advisable to first implement a get call, because whenever you are implementing a get call, you would be getting a structure that you can use as a request and pass it into a post call, because that is something that you would be receiving while triggering a post call. So post call implementation and testing via gateway client is something which every developer is not knowing and they are not having good hands-on on it. So that is something that they are getting actually confused on. So create deep entity and get expand entity. First of all, you should be knowing which implementation will get triggered, on which component it actually depends. So it depends on your technical clauses in which you are specifying. Though you have specified everything, if you are not specifying the technical clauses over here, individual implementation will get triggered, and this individual implementation will ultimately give the resultant output which is not in your expectation. So all you need to do is you should be able to identify for what particular call, where is the hook method you should be writing the code. So get expanded entity and create deep entity is the main stuff on which your any of the application would be rotating on, because nowhere, maybe very limited application would be there who would be depending on only a single entities. Mostly they would be depending on multiple entities and their internal relation, and that is something that you should be very clear about, and that is something your interview questions would be around. Okay. So
thanks.
maybe you can also give it a try, and if you are running into any issue, then I'm there. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for joining. Bye bye.